Hey guys, welcome to another episode of King James Teaches. Hope you got time to drink a cup of coffee with me. Today we're going to tackle a tough topic, slavery. Listen, I've never been much of a history buff, but just from common sense, I would say that probably not everybody owned slaves. And then I would also venture out there to say that not everybody treated slaves horribly, because the Bible says that slaves should now it's been changed to where now it says servants, but the Bible says slaves treat your masters a certain way, and then it also says that masters should treat their slaves a certain way, but slaves should obey their masters and this, that, and the other. So I'd like to point out a few things, first of all, about American slavery. American slavery, there was probably a few people that owned hundreds and hundreds of slaves, and they treated them pretty rough. And it's like what you see in America, they portray slavery as. But if we look at it, the majority of the people in America didn't own slaves. You know, it wasn't like a widely done thing. You know, I'd say for context, my family could barely afford a car. They probably could not afford a slave, you know, which would have been like a piece of farm equipment that would have made your life better, because you'd have had it in abundance. You'd have had more work hand. You know, it's like most people in the country raise their children to be their work hands, you know. And then you'd have to say that there were probably some people, if we looked at slavery on a real live thing, in the way humanity is, there were probably people that treated slaves horribly, but there were probably people also that treated slaves good, that fed them and took care of them, because they're working for me. You know, if you beat them up and they can't work tomorrow, that's not very intelligent. Why would you spend all that money on buying a car to go out there and pop your own tires? That doesn't make sense. You know, you're not going to be able to go nowhere with flat tires. So in some cases it was probably horrible, and in some cases it was probably not like what America portrays it as, because America wants to make everything this white man evil demonic thing. Well, I would say that there was probably some people. Let's just play this out in our mind and just see if this makes sense to you. This is just logic. This is not me looking it up. I know that the history books used to say that some slaves went across the line to the free world and brought their people back, their masters back, because they loved their master. They you know, and some people that was trying to be free didn't want to leave their plantation. You know, they were like part of the family. And so I'd like to first of all point out that, let's pretend like we're back in the day where slavery was a thing. So this white tycoon who's rich and owns everything, he's paying these farmers to do his work for him. He's not out there doing it himself. He's got people out here that are working for little bitty wages and doing his farm work for him. Then he sends some people over to buy him some slaves. He doesn't go catch them. He goes and buys them from other people. He buys them, brings them back. Now all them people that was working in his yard now are fired. You know, so probably a lot of white people was kind of ticked off that they could go buy slaves, you know. So those are the people that everyone who owns slaves gets portrayed as this evil tycoon who had them in chains, and they were out there just beating them. And you know, it doesn't make sense to me that you would bring somebody over here from another country and just start beating them. You know, you'd have to teach them how to work. You'd have to teach them what you want them to do. You know, and then if you hurt them, they're not going to be able to work. You know, so it doesn't make sense that everybody was that. But that's what gets portrayed as. You know, America likes to try to divide this world by black and white, because if it's divided, it's easier to conquer. But the truth is, guys, black friends of mine and white friends of mine, the truth is, it's not black or white. It's rich or poor. You know, that's the real only dividing line, because the slaves had room and board. But what about all the people who got fired because their boss man bought a bunch of slaves? You know, so now that this rich guy ain't even got to work me no more, he's got free labor. And it's some rich tycoon. There's probably 10 or 15 of them in America that was doing that. You know, there's probably not thousands upon thousands. I don't know the numbers, but it just doesn't seem smart to me. If everybody who owns dogs, some people put them in matches and make them fight to the death. But some people have dogs and they pet them and love them, and that's like their children. So I would assume that there was white folks ticked off that this rich guy bought slaves and don't have to work us no more. Now how am I going to feed my family because I don't have a job? He didn't go and get some slaves. He didn't have the money to feed his family, you know. So the poor people get the black people point at them and say, well, you were part of it. You were part of it. I grew up in a world where I've only read the stuff in the history books, and it seems to me that you guys are when people talk about slavery, they talk about the rich folks, because everybody didn't have slaves. Not everybody has cars. You know, if cars came alive and started griping at everybody that just been driving them around for free, you know, a lot of people ain't got cars. Some people walk. Some people got bicycles. You know what I mean? And then you got to look at the white men who died to free slaves. And I'm not even trying to get off on that whole thing, but it's a rich against poor. It's not a white against black. You know. But I'll tell you this, that a constant conversation about it. I seen a video. I'll just say this. I seen a video of a woman saying that she was in a grocery store, and this woman of color was in front of her and didn't have enough money to pay for her food, and she was a white woman standing behind her, and so she offered, here's a few dollars, let me help you pay for the food. The lady behind her was black, and the lady at the cash register was black. And when the woman accepted the money and paid for it and went on out the door, the lady behind her and the lady at the cash register started mocking her, saying, well, I bet that made you feel special, that you could help a poor black woman, and this, that, and the other. And I'll tell you this, that the woman standing behind her and the lady at the cash register, you guys have made it harder for black people everywhere. And here's why. Because say there's a white woman in the grocery store and she sees this black woman who's not got enough to pay for her food. And the white woman has seen that video. She's going to be like, well, I'd go over there and offer her some money, but I don't want these other black people jumping on me for it. So now the woman who really needs it can't get it because these arrogant folks who are just mad for whatever reason, just to be pointing the finger at somebody, you know. But people bring up, this is my point of bringing this video up. People bring up that there was slavery in the Bible. Let me explain something to you. If you had lived in the Bible days and we're doing some trading and I got to feed my family for a little while and I borrow some money from you and I don't have the money to pay you back, there's no such thing as a bank. The only thing I can do to pay you is become your slave. You know, if I can't pay my debt and it's went on long enough, then I can go over there and sign myself up and say, look here, boss man, I don't have the money. I can't come up with it. My crops aren't doing right now. Just, you know, accept my labor for however long, you know, depending on what you borrowed. And then you would work there. And then a lot of times people would bring their family with them. You know, say you'd bring your wife, you'd bring your child, and you'd say, look, man, I don't have the money. Give us room and board and we'll work for you for this amount of years, you know. And then once the amount of years was lived out, then they would say, okay, you're free now, you can leave. And the guy would either decide to leave or stay. And if he decides to stay, they would take and put his head against the wall and they'd take this spike and drive it through his ear so there'd be a hole in his ear, and you will know that he has decided to stay here. He is an owned slave. He's not here on labor pay. He's here as he lives here. And even in back further than that, if you go back to Jacob went to his uncle's house, and he fell in love with his daughter. And he said, look, I'll work for you for 7 years as a slave if you give me your daughter to marry. He's sure. So he works him 7 years. And then after the 7 years was up, he married him. He gave him the wrong daughter. So he says, hey, you tricked me. He said, okay, if you work another 7 years for me as a slave, then I'll give you the right daughter. So he gets both his daughters, but he had to work 14 years for free for it. Room and board is all he got. So when you look at the Bible and say, I don't like the Bible because Bible says, slaves should honor their master, and masters, is allowed this on their slaves or whatever, you got to look at the time and date it was. It wasn't chains and shackles and whips and white men on horses with cone-headed hats. That's not what it was. It was, I can't pay my bill, bro. But it's like, say I went to a roofing company and I borrowed some money. Hey man, I need $1,000 and I'm trying to do this, and this, and and then the collateral is, if I can't pay you, I'll come to work with you for free for a little while. Okay, so it rolls around that I can't pay my bill, so I go to him. I'm like, hey man, I couldn't pay the bill, but if you let the wife and the kid and me live here and feed us every day, then I'll come to work for you until I can pay it off. I'll work for you for free as long as you feed us and take care of us. And that's what it was. It was a form of barter and trade. It wasn't what you think of when you think of the American stained picture of slavery. And just to clarify, I don't think slavery in the sense of what they portray it to be in America, where you see the black men in plantations all on chains and they're getting whipped and down talked, and that's nothing good. The Bible doesn't condone you being mean to people. The Bible doesn't say you're allowed to treat people harshly. That's not what the Bible said. The Bible doesn't say go get you some slaves, run in some place and steal them. It's a form of trade and barter. It's a form of, I can't pay my bill and I can't feed my family, so let me go stay here, and the wife will cook his food. My kids will clean his house, and I'll go and work in his fields. And people was okay with that. Was there situations back then where slavery was probably abused? Probably so. But there's places in America now where phones are being abused. There's places where people are being abused at their job, where they're getting worked and not getting a raise when they're supposed to, and then there's also people who work who don't want to come in when they're supposed to. So all form of work is a form of work. A lot of people who brought people over to be slaves fell in love with their slaves. They were part of the family. And like I say, it might have been a small amount of people, but I think it's more leaning on the lines of a minority of rich tycoons was treating their slaves like that, because it doesn't make sense if you only got one slave to start trying to beat him or whoop him or anything like that. It'd be better to sit out there and teach him, But and even the Bible says in some cases a servant is more like a son to an honorable servant is more like a son to a person who I guess, I don't know if the words have been changed and that particular phrase is meaning a slave, but it says it. It says, someone who has to serve a master is honored as a son when he does good and does right. And that's what the Bible teaches. The Bible doesn't teach that you should put people on chains and whip them and beat them. So I just wanted to clarify that this morning. And the reason is because I'm in 2 Timothy and chapter 6 here says, let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of God and his doctrine be not blasphemed. So that's telling, and I think that this is where the Bible used to say slaves and now it says servants. But I think it's saying slaves, honor your master. And people are like, well, that's just horrible. How could the Bible teach something like that? I'm not going to believe in the Bible. How could God say, you're not understanding what this is? If you tell somebody, I will work for you to pay off my debt, then you should honor that. You should honor it to the best of your ability. If you tell somebody, look, I can't pay you, let me come to work for you for 2 days, you should work of the best of your ability. You should not slack on things and pretend like you're working and not really do it. You shouldn't trick them into things. You should treat them with honor. Okay? And they that have believing masters, let them not despise them, because they are brethren, but rather do them service, because they are faithful. Do not despise them, because they are brethren, but rather do them service, because they are faithful and beloved, partakers of the benefit. These things teach and exhort. And that's chapter 6 in 1 Timothy. So seeing that, I thought, well, people a lot of times take verses like that, and if it, like I say, if it's where it was changed from slave to servant, then I could see if I was black in America that I would be offended by that. But I wanted you to understand that that's not what it means. It doesn't mean slaves honor some master who's beating you, and that's not what the Bible's talking about. Back then, slavery was different than what it is today. And I watched a video on Cliff Kenichi or whatever, where he touched base on it, and I just don't think he got that full point across. Is that slavery wasn't, a horrible thing, and even when it was like Joseph was sold into slavery. So Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, and Potiphar didn't get him and beat him down. You know what I mean? Potiphar gave him room and board, and he became head over his household. So even in that case where you're bought into slavery, somebody kidnaps you, or you're a prisoner of war and you're made a slave, you're still treated with some sort of dignity and given a job and a role, and you should treat your masters right. Why? Because they're honorable and you're just a slave? No, because look at what happened with Joseph. Joseph made his way to where he was the most important slave of Potiphar. He was in control of his household. Joseph could go and buy and sell land in Potiphar's name. Why? Because he honored his master. Now, is that saying these things to honor your master for your benefit if you are a slave? Probably so. It's not for the master's benefit, but for your benefit if you are a slave and you're in this situation. But anyway, I digress. I'm probably going to get some hate for this, but I don't know. I don't have a lot of views on a lot of my videos, so maybe there won't be many people see it anyway, and I don't care either way. I'm still just teaching what's in the Bible. And like I said earlier, all the things that I said about the majority of people probably didn't own slaves, and there was a lot of white people who lost their jobs due to slavery. I would say to those things without even looking it up or being a history buff, that would have to be the case, because somebody was working the fields before the rich guy bought slaves. And if people would look at the world instead of black and white, and this person is that, and this person is that, and we looked more at the world of rich and poor, all poor people have to sign on for crimes that they could normally beat if they were rich. It's not just black people, it's white people, all people. I've been in the system more than I've been free, and I'm not saying I've been locked up longer than I've been free, but I've been in the system and working the system. I still don't have a license, you know what I mean? I still have warrants in certain places. So I've been in these places a million times, and I'm going to tell you right now, when you're in jail or something, you don't get treated no different than anybody else in there, Maybe if you're in some weird place where it's majority white and there's only one black guy. I've heard stories where a black guy would have to fight, and then he ended up being friends with everybody there. I've had a few of my friends, and I had a couple of black friends of mine tell me that they went to a place one time and the white people were out to get them because they were all racist there. And that's probably, I doubt they're lying to me. But the majority of America, man, I don't see it being a thing